He's like a butterfly flapping his wings deep down into the forest, man. It's gonna cause a tree fall like 5,000 miles away, man. There ain't nobody seeing nobody. Man, see, like, you don't even know, man. It's like you're born into this world, man. And you got like that, man, the dust and wind, man. Or like the dang old candle, man. It don't matter, man. It's all the time.
All right, Kyle Anzalone, welcome to the Jay Burden Show. How you doing, man?
Great, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, I'm really excited to have you on. I've been aware of your work for quite some time. We travel in similar circles, but recently you were a guest host on Provoked with Scott Horton and Daryl Cooper, one of my favorite podcasts. And so, yeah, man, I'm really excited to finally host you.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I also saw you on Provoked, and that was the first time I became aware of your work, and I believe I started following you on X, and I've seen some of your stuff since. And obviously we travel in the same circles because just great knowledge. I really like your perspective on something, so I appreciate you having me on. Glad to be on the show.
Well, I appreciate it, man. So really, as much as I hate to talk about it because it is it's incredibly depressing, but obviously the story of really 2026 at this point is the war in Iran. And you and I were kind of joking about the fact that this war has been, we have claimed victory in this war, depending on who you ask, 6 to 9 times in a war that is still ongoing. And look, like, I'm not a professional when it comes to international relations, but it seems to me that if you say the war is over and it keeps happening, it probably wasn't over. Just a kind of wild guess there.
Right. I mean, how many times too is saying the war is won or saying Iran is defeated? I mean, there's been times where Trump says Iran is defeated, and with 30 minutes or an hour, they're firing a Slavo missiles at both Israel and U.S. bases in the region. So it's wild that Donald Trump has tried to say that we've won this war so many times when the administration is still looking at options for escalation. So clearly it's not won if we're preparing a ground invasion.
Well, Kyle, I hate to inform you that you have trooned out. You are a foreign agent, maybe a traitor to America for remembering something that happened 3 days ago. In all seriousness, right, the thing that I have found the most aggravating has primarily been the sort of post hoc justifications. You probably saw a clip from Ben Shapiro going around where he was arguing for a ground invasion. Like, we need to do this in order to finish the fight. And he very disingenuously turned and said, well, and this is why our soldiers are so great. That's why you have to support our troops, because they knew that this was on the table and they put their lives at risk. Albeit, I'm sure you remember, many people will, that is not what Ben Shapiro said a week ago or 2 weeks ago. First, it was, just a decapitation strike, just to take out the mullahs. Then it was, well, we need to blow up some stuff to stop the nuclear program or the ballistic missiles. And now, of course, the whole time while saying we're doing this so we don't have to send troops in on the ground, well, all of a sudden, right, you got walked like a dog by the neocons. And I bring up Shapiro because I find him irritating. I don't like him. But he's not the only one, right? Have you noticed that same kind of slow escalation in rhetoric?
Yeah. Well, in one way, it is a slow escalation in rhetoric. In another way, it's only been a month. And in that month, Ben Shapiro has gone from claiming that people say that the Iran war is an escalation trap and the U.S. is going to get drawn into this prolonged thing. It's going to turn into a ground invasion. And he was saying, he was saying that the people saying that are saying it because they're anti-Semites, right? That was a month ago, not years ago, not a decade ago. It's not something he was writing when he was at UCLA in college. He was saying that on his current show a month ago. And now he's just saying that this is the policy and we all need to accept it. Now, of course, Shapiro who likes to brand himself as like, a conservative, and he believes in the Constitution. This isn't legally a war. I mean, it's an illegal war being waged by the United States. It is a war, but Congress hasn't declared war, given authorization for use of military force, hell, even provided the Pentagon funding to fight a war in the Middle East, to send our soldiers to the Middle East. So Shapiro saying, well, this is what you signed up for when you joined the military, is to go fight at the direction of the commander in chief. No, they fight in defense of their country, or when Congress declares war. And neither of those things are going on here. So it really isn't their duty to fight this war. And of course, Shapiro is all on board with this, because the real beneficiary, the only party that really benefits from this, is the select group in the Israeli leadership. It is a widespread view of Israel, but it's not all Israelis who want the Greater Israel Project. They want to expand Israel's borders, and doing that requires them to be the only power in the region. And this is, achieving that goal through numerous effects. One, it's destroying Iran. It's also destroying the Gulf states, but it's also getting rid of the framework, or it could get rid of the framework in the Middle East that would prevent Israel from attacking Jordan or Saudi Arabia or the UAE if they chose to do so, which is, those states are protected by the US. And so, what this war is proving to the leadership in, Riyadh and in all these Gulf Arab countries, is that this deal you made with the United States, where we put our bases in your country and you buy our weapons, and in exchange, you're a part of the American security bloc, and we will defend you if attacked, simply isn't true. I mean, these countries are being attacked not because Iran wanted to go to war with them, because the US and Israel chose to go to war with Iran. So this is, I think, really a huge step in the right direction for those people who want the Greater Israel Project, should this war work out where Iran is in some way like in the middle of a civil war, or just utterly destroyed.
Well, and this is something that I spoke about Scott Horton with. If I'm remembering my schedule right, when you were listening to this, listener, this will have happened 2 days ago. So, scroll back if you're interested in more context there. But it's incredibly disingenuous. And that's what's so frustrating about this, as you mentioned. It's not like you or I are digging up, someone's statements from when they were 16, 17. When you say things maybe you don't mean, or where we've had enough time that the facts on the ground can change, people can grow and evolve their thinking over time. This is 2 weeks ago, right? It isn't a vast span of time. And really, there is an attempt to gaslight people. There is an attempt to, effectively convince them that they are crazy, that they are, irredeemable racists, anti-Semites, that they harbor some irrational hatred, for the state of Israel. And that's the only reason why you have objections. Not the very real on the ground problems we are seeing, right? Gas prices, diplomatic issues, things that, I might add, many of the critics of this war before it started brought up. Said, well, what happens when Iran shuts down the Strait of Hormuz? What happens to our diplomatic partners who rely on Iranian energy? Well, that was all unimportant nonsense. You again were maybe an agent of a foreign power for bringing that up. And now that those predictions have come to pass, well, that argument, we never had it, right? This is always what we were saying. One of the comments that I received, and you shouldn't read comments, but every once in a while they're sort of insightful, said, this feels very much like we were always at war with Eurasia, right? We have always been, in the exact situation we have been now, right? Again, I bring up the Strait of Hormuz, not because I particularly know anything about how global shipping works, but I'm old enough to remember when it was open a month ago, right? And I think that that's what's sort of crazy making about this, is the constant kind of willful sort of like occlusion of the facts, right? Willfully resetting the chatbot, if you will, every day, right? It's like this is a story that has been sort of truncated at every moment. It's, as you can probably tell, I get a little bit upset about it. But I'm curious, Kyle, what do you make of the Joe Kent resignation? Because to me, it seems symptomatic of a wider split within MAGA specifically and the general cultural right. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is my assessment from how Joe Kent has handled the resignation and how he's spoken about Trump afterwards, where look, a lot of people have said, oh, Joe Kent is looking for, his next political move, right? Essentially, he's the first rat jumping off of the ship here. He sees it going down and he's going to say, I told him it was all a bad idea. But he's really just trying, I think, to end this conflict. Like, that is his only goal. And, this has really bothered me. I've kind of noticed this where a lot of people, particularly on the right half of America, will say we should all praise Donald Trump and say it was a great move if he ends this war tomorrow, right? Like, we all have to appeal to Trump's ego because we know if we don't do that, then we're not going to get this war ended. It's just, but it's disgusting, right? No, like, even if this war ends tomorrow, like, Donald Trump is a war criminal. A U.S. bomb destroyed an Iranian school in a surprise attack on a country that posed no threat to the United States of America, right? They don't have a nuclear program. They don't have an ICBM program. And they would only attack the U.S. in response to a U.S. or Israeli attack on Iran, which you could say, oh, they're making a threat. But that is the standing case with every country in the world, right? Like, if we attack China, China's going to attack U.S. allies and U.S. bases in their region. And just the same as if the United States was attacked by another country, we would attack, their bases in the region, maybe their allies that they're involved in the fight. So, that's just standard how the world operates. That's what sovereign countries do, is they say, if we have to, we will defend ourselves against your military assets and allies. Kent is really just working hard here, though, to try to sell to Donald Trump that the right move is to take an off ramp. My guess is he understands where we go up the escalation ladder from here, that bombing Iran into submission really isn't an option. And so unless they're willing to just pack up and go, they're going to put ground troops in. If not, look towards maybe using nuclear weapons are really the only two options up the escalation ladder I think the U.S. has. They could bomb more targets, but again, that's not going to remove the Islamic Republic, and they're going to rebuild once this conflict is over. And if we continue to attack, they'll continue to fire back. So Kent is just trying to resign and trying to get Trump out of office. And one thing I want to say, you make a really good point. It's like resetting the AI chatbot every day with the new round of propaganda that we're hearing, right? Like, what we said yesterday is completely irrelevant. This is what we're doing today. The interesting thing is it doesn't seem to be working, because even if you reset the AI chatbot, everybody on X could post a video of what Shapiro was saying in the first days of this conflict, how it was going to be a quick war and we are going to be out. And the people saying this was going to be entangling a conflict with a ground occupation like Iraq are not only wrong, they're hysterical, they're panicking, they're anti-Semitic, they're pro-Iran, whatever he wanted to say. But now he's saying those exact things. And so I don't think it's going to work this time. I don't think it worked. The propaganda worked very well in Ukraine for the same reasons, because everybody was able to play clips of all these figures during the 2000s, 2010s, mainly saying that, hey, if you do this, you're going to provoke Russia and we're going to end up having a conflict. It's not like the Iraq War, where Americans are basically forced to rely on CNN, Fox News, the Washington Post, the New York Times for their information about the conflict. And they didn't do these kinds of things where they said, this is what Dick Cheney said 2 weeks ago. This is what he's saying now. But and antiwar.com existed back then. But, unless you were in those niche corners of the internet, you really didn't know. Now, it's on X every day in front of everybody's face, utterly humiliating Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin and Mike Huckabee and Ted Cruz. I mean, they're just getting annihilated on the platform every day. And so I think public opinion is going to continue to move. The only thing with Kent's resignation is I hope somebody joins him. Right. I think the only problem right now is he's kind of on an island. Had Tulsi Gabbard resigned too, I think it would have made a bigger deal. So hopefully, more momentum rolls as, people look on X and they see overwhelmingly the Americans not only are opposed to this war, but really do hate the people who are lying to them about it.
Well, and to that point, this is additionally to any, moral concerns we may or may not have. This is an abject political disaster. You'll notice, speaking of the kind of continually redefined goals, measurements, how we define success, how we have defeated Iran 6 to 9 times. The polling and how the polling has been reported has been quite interesting, because you'll notice that the focus is on MAGA Republicans. And as I'm sure you're aware, Kyle, there's no official voter rolls for that. You don't join the MAGA Republican Party. If you self-describe as that basically means I'm personally, myself, a giant fan of Donald Trump, which is basically a proxy for what do I think about this war. So when they're saying things in kind of a North Korea-esque fashion that 100% of people who like this war say they like this war, it's like, well, I mean, yeah, I probably could have figured that one out, because on pretty much any other issue, and, I'm sure we're all aware of how polls are manipulated in any number of directions, but I can think of almost no issue that 100% of Americans agree on. I'm talking about like really basic ones, like is murder right or wrong? Like there's going to be at least someone out there, right? Even just to throw the poll.
It's absurd, because typically they would maybe poll, like they would say Biden voters or Trump voters, like that would be the collection. And that's kind of, I think, what maybe people think of when they hear MAGA are Trump supporters, people who voted for Donald Trump. But really, if you're asking people, are you MAGA? And then they say yes. And then they ask, do you support the president's main initiative right now? They're going to say yes. If they didn't support the president's main initiative at the current time, then they don't support the president and they're not MAGA. And I mean, you bring up the North Korea reference. I think Kim Jong-un only won chairman of the Workers' Party in North Korea by 99.93%. So even there's a margin of error in Pyongyang that doesn't exist in Washington anymore. Now, on the political point, I think this is really, really, really important. After 9/11, the Republicans in the United States, like the conservatives, had the cultural momentum. It wasn't just that, the Republicans had political power, but, the rally around the flag and kind of the base conservative values were, I think, dominant. And that dominance was lost in Iraq, right? Like the administration lied so much about the war and exposed themselves as such horrific people that the American people went out and they elected Barack Obama with a Democratic Congress. But not only that, the culture in this country moved really, really and unacceptably far to the left, right? Like we got to the point where the trans cultural movement had actually outpaced like the medical science of it, right? Like and it was because the Republicans had so greatly discredited it themselves. And it wasn't until the Democrats went so overboard on the trans issue, the cultural issue, the women's sports stuff, the BLM, that we really got in 2024 a real shift back to a culture, more conservative culture, which I think needs to happen a little bit. But Donald Trump is going to blow it all, right? The Democrats are going to annihilate the Republicans. And I think for years to come, they're going to play clips of Donald Trump not only saying we won the war, but kind of like joking about killing people. Pete Hegseth in particular talking about how, our bombs are blessed by the Lord and all this other like religious kookery he's trying to insert into the war making. J.D. Vance suggesting that some Iranian is going to walk into a supermarket with, I'm not even joking, he actually said this, a nuclear weapon suicide vest and blow himself up. I mean, the claims coming out of the administration right now are absurd, and they're really going to discredit the right wing. I think not only are we going to see a massive just like political victory for the Democrats in the midterms, but also it's going to lose the Republicans really their cultural moment they had, which even if I don't agree with all of it, I do think was needed after the past 2 decades.
Well, and there are several things. We've already seen this happen, right? And what happens is that you see this in, my state of Virginia, where, the Democrats run someone who on first inspection seems very sensible, right? This, nice white lady from the CIA, she seems great. And then it's like, oh, well, we got rid of mandatory minimums for murder and rape and decriminalized vagrancy. And it's like, well, they didn't lead with that. It's not like she came out as, the head of the pro rape and murder party. I think a minority position in the U.S. But all of those excesses will come. They will not be broadcasted. And on the other issue is someone who is, to, shall we say, significantly to the right of, many people. What I've noticed, and I've been sounding the bell on this since the election, is that there has been a deliberate desire to paint the sort of secondary parts of the American right, the anti-war movement, the more, shall we say, stridently religious conservatives. You see, a lot of attacks on, traditional Catholics or the scare phrase Christian nationalists, and to lay the groundwork and say, oh, that's why we're going to lose the next election. It's not because Trump didn't deliver. It's not because of this unpopular war. It's because of you people. Many of the same people who have been fighting against the neocons for 30 years. That's the problem. We did too much of that. What we need is another John McCain. And if we had just done that, then we never would have, ended up in these dire straits. And I think that was a very interesting admission, even shortly after the election, right? Saying what gave Trump this incredible victory. And the people taking credit for it and also laying the ground afterwards, well before we, got into this ill-conceived foreign war, were saying, this is who you're going to blame when things go wrong. And I'm not going to say it's working, but if there is a massive, electoral defeat, that's what narrative will, be presented. It will not be, we did something wrong. We, sort of acted as Israel's lapdog. It's the bad guys. It's the woke right is the term you see, being thrown around. And so that scapegoat has sort of already been made, right? They've laid the ground to blame what in my mind are the only redeemable parts of the American right. And to say, well, if we had only been more neoconservative, if we had only done more, that's what would have saved us. So we need to purge these people. You saw this happen even well before this at places like Heritage. I am hearing from many people, like more than a handful, that the same fight is happening in a less public version at every major conservative institution, right? There's a major war over this issue. And we understand that same generational divide is present in support for this war. And so for those people who were bought in hook, line, and sinker, well, that's their highest priority, seemingly, the continuance and the support of a foreign nation. Well, that can't be challenged. That can't be the reason we lost. The reason is we let bad people in. And seemingly the message in, many conservative institutions, you saw this in the Heritage scandal, is cut out anyone under the age of 40. Just get rid of them. And look, even if you just understand how a population pyramid works or when the baby boomer generation hits 50% mortality, you understand that's not a great long-term strategy. And all of those secondary groups, the people you saw brought in from kind of the, the health sphere, the more kind of conspiracy-minded folks, the anti-war folks who were brought into that big tent coalition, who may not self-describe as MAGA Republicans, well, they're leaving in droves. And recognizing that fact does not make you an agent of a foreign power.
Yeah.
You are simply believing your lying eyes.
Yeah, well, and while we're on the politics of this real quick, one other thing, they're going to blame Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and whoever else, but Mike Johnson might deserve most of the blame because he allowed the War Powers resolution to come to a floor vote. Now, I'm not saying that this is a bad thing, but tactically, as the leadership, allowing these votes to happen, allowing the Democrats Chuck Schumer supports this war, right? But Chuck Schumer actually got to go and vote against this war. Almost all the Democrats voted against the war on the War Powers, except John Fetterman, I think, in the Senate. Similar numbers in the House, right? Where it's almost all Republicans voting for it, all Democrats voting against it. And so now, even if, like, Chuck Schumer is largely responsible for the political situation the U.S. was in that led to the U.S. going to war with Israel against Iran, and Chuck Schumer supports Israel, will probably vote to fund it, right, coming up here in a couple weeks. But when they run for re-election, all the Democrats will get to tell the American people, we tried to stop it, we tried to vote against it, but the Republicans railroaded us, and that's why you had to vote them out and vote us in. I mean, the handling of the Epstein files was probably the worst political blunder of the Trump administration so far, but this is a very close second, and I think come November, it's really going to make a big deal when gas prices are well over $5 a gallon, when the war has hurt the American economy, inflation is 3 or 4%, and the Democrats will get to say, we tried to stop it, and the Republicans all voted for it, except Thomas Massie and just a few others, who, by the way, are the Republicans that the party establishment are trying to exile from the party right now. Also, you said they're trying to kick out all the under 40s from the Republican Party. It is interesting that polling shows that even among Republicans, you only have a majority that support the U.S. relationship with Israel over the age of 50. Under the age of 50, it's at least like a plurality that support Israel. It's not a full-on majority. And once you get, I think, under 35, it's actually they don't support the American relationship with Israel.
Well, and to that point, you've heard this same messaging from, well, bring him up again a second time, Ben Shapiro. He had a really interesting section in one of his shows. I believe the show, I wrote an article on this, so I should know the citation, is Can NYC Survive Mamdani's Regime? Maybe? You'll find it that way. Most of those words are correct. But in that episode, he makes a very interesting inference where he says, and who knows where he got these numbers from, but he said 53% of American or of male Republicans under the age of 50 are Holocaust deniers, right? They don't believe the official narrative of the Holocaust. I believe the exact phrase he uses is they don't believe historians. Now, a rational actor might ask, well, which historians? Sidebar issue there.
Like sometimes they'll ask these questions so vaguely, like, do you question any of the official narrative of the Holocaust? And somebody might say, oh, I heard the thing about the lampshades and that sounded a little far-fetched, right? Like, it's not like these people are saying, I don't believe Hitler killed the Jews. They're just being asked, are they skeptical about anything? And they answer yes. So I really hate the polling because I think it actually, to some degree, ends up fueling anti-Semitism by making it seem like it's a far more popular position than it is. But sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. And, look, like as someone with their own, shall we say, revisionist tendencies, right? My objection is, of course, right, that he makes a very interesting transition from that, right? He says the Manhattan poll, or the Manhattan Institute rather, came with this poll. And from that statement, right, he goes straight from, the majority of young Republicans believe the Holocaust didn't happen. And he immediately transitions to talking with no break into the critics of the Iran war. And what he says, and this is very interesting because you'll hear this all over in discussions of this issue, is he says, and this is exactly the problem. We have these young conspiracy theorists who are buying into what he calls grievance politics, which is a really long roundabout way to basically say, if you disagree with us, you're part of the woke left, right? You are the blue-haired gender goblin. Basically, it is, if you're not with us, you're with the terrorists all over again. Time is a flat circle. The last 20 years didn't happen. We're just doing it all over again. And again, it's incredibly disingenuous, right? It's incredibly dishonest to basically say, the only reason you can disagree with me is if you are what I have described as the most horrible people in the world. The only people who don't agree with me are horrible and irredeemable. And you might say, well, I don't share the same opinions about, the group, but we've got to understand, functionally in America, being a Holocaust denier is up there with being a child molester. It is perceived to be very negative. So even if you have opinions about wooden doors, which, I might not share, you've got to understand what's going on here, right? It is a slimy rhetorical trick, and it is one we have seen echoed over and over and over again. For instance, Kyle, one of my favorite games I've been playing for the last couple of days is go on to John Podhoritz's Twitter and search any insult you can think of, and he has been screaming it at people for the last month, right? Again, bringing in all of these kind of low, underhanded tactics to basically say, if you don't support this war, you are, a list of every insult and 4-letter word you can think of, right? And I think it's very interesting that, one, we don't really have a defined victory condition. What's our goal here? What are we doing? And if you object to that, if you bring that up, if you have any objection, however small, well, according to the neocons, the only place you can go is into the bucket of deplorables. But sorry, Kyle, I've been ranting for a while.
No, I mean, you make a lot of good points there. I just, I don't think it's going to work for a couple of reasons. Again, things aren't the way they were when you could write an article in National Review and say that, Pat Buchanan and Justin Raimondo are just too far to the right and we can't accept those guys. When, Ben Shapiro tries to levy those kinds of attacks, and when they're levied against me, I mean, it's laughable, right? Because the same people would, I'm pals with Daryl Cooper. And so they would call me a Nazi for too far to the right for hanging out with Daryl. And then the next week they're going to call me a leftist, a green-haired leftist for the same position. I just don't think it's going to work because it's so much easier for people to defend themselves now. When somebody calls me woke now, I'm you do realize I work at antiwar.com, the site founded by Justin Raimondo. I work for Judge Andrew Napolitano, right? I work at a website that's published articles by Pat Buchanan and Ron Paul, and again, I'm pals with Daryl and Dave Smith, and people who just are so far from the left and have been so critical of the left that I don't think it's going to work, especially trying to make these attacks against people like myself, our Tucker Carlson, our Dave Smith, our Candace Owens. They're just so clearly to the right, and everybody's panicked and been calling them Hitler for the past 10 years that nobody's going to believe that, oh, no, Candace Owens, she didn't have a secret Hitler stash. What she really did is had a secret blue wig and was going to BLM protests that night or something. Nobody even remotely believes any of this. And so I think that's why the U.S. is now in certainly a month into the conflict, probably the most unpopular war that we've ever been in, right? Usually at the start of war, particularly this early on, people are rallying around the flag, and some people have, but the shine is going to wear off this war, and it's not going to look good. What people realize, it already doesn't look good, right? Like the polls are already majority unpopular, but I mean, by the time the inflation and the oil prices really start to hit, and this is dragging on for 2 or 3 months, and it's one thing to pay an extra 20-30 bucks to fill up your gas tank 2 or 3 times, right? Most people have enough money to take that hit, but when it's in your car and your wife's car, and it's happened for 4 months now, right? You're filling up that 16 times, 32 times both cars. That's dipping into your savings territory, right? Like this isn't like accounting that you can maybe make work out for a couple of weeks in your household. And so once that starts to happen, I mean, I think we're going to see just like really the most die-hard Trump supporters that say they still support this conflict.
Well, I mean, and look, man, to that point, as someone who drives a 28-year-old vehicle that gets 12 miles to the gallon downhill, yeah, I'm feeling it. I really don't appreciate it, to put it mildly. And I think one of the interesting features that we've seen both on the political and on the military side is this seems to be a very short-sighted set of decisions, right? This seems to basically be what we might call a high time preference behavior, right? I want it and I want it now. Like even on the most basic level, right? You look at the assassination of Khomeini. Well, Khomeini was what, 87? 86? Okay. He apparently had, colon cancer. I'm not going to pretend to know anything about Iranian medical technology. But if he were an 86-year-old living in Los Angeles, right, near some of the best hospitals in the world, you wouldn't exactly be, planning too far ahead. I'll put it that way, right? That is a very old man, one who is past the point where most people die. So kicking off a war to kill him, it's like, well, what's the point? Similarly, right, all of these problems were easily foreseeable. And yet, nonetheless, here we are at war. When we look on the political front, clearly the issue of Israel and our relationship to Israel is alive and well on both the right and the left. The left sort of did their purges a little bit earlier, right? Kind of in late Biden. I'm sure you remember the protest that kind of sparked up after October 7th. But people knew this was an issue on the American right before. And so to burn all of that capital, even from the president's position, like he very likely, not directly because of this, but for other reasons, is going to be impeached because of this war and its consequences. And again, all of these issues, you didn't have to be a genius. You didn't have to have the 140 IQ to project 6 months into the future. And so that's the part of it that's both very galling and sort of disturbing is seemingly no one has made that calculation, or for whatever reason, they think it's worth it. And one more thing, and I'll throw it back to you, Kyle, because this is supposed to be an interview instead of just me monologuing at a guest I brought in. But as you can tell, I'm a little fired up on this. This was a point that, that Brett Weinstein brought up when he was on Tucker, and Tucker appeared on his show at the same time, where he basically said it sort of feels like they're going for broke, that they're pulling out all the stops. I'm curious, one, have you felt the same way? And can you think of anything that might explain it?
Sorry. It's really difficult to try to puzzle out what's actually going on in the White House and how we got into this conflict. As you mentioned at the start of it, the Ayatollah, the former Ayatollah, was an 86-year-old, at least cancer survivor, if didn't actively have cancer. And if you saw him in public, like there are maybe some 80-year-olds that are fairly spry and healthy. He wasn't that. He was an average 86-year-old man. And it seemed to me that if you really wanted to destroy the Islamic Republic, you probably could have exploited the slow decline and death of the man who's been leading the Islamic Republic for over half of its existence, right? And try to, stir up some like kind of politics and, just put out like use your resources in the media to be like, oh, is the Ayatollah planning to hand power to his son? And just, there's a lot of opportunity in the decline of a longtime ruler, the medical decline of a longtime ruler, as his faculties fail, as his cognitive abilities fail, to exploit the position and try to weaken Iran in that sense. And look, over the past several decades, with that Ayatollah in power, the U.S. has been able to severely weaken Iran. We ran an article, or no, next week we'll have an article at antiwar.com by David Stockman laying out like how far behind the Iranian economy has fallen under the Islamic Republic, and how a lot of that is due to the U.S. intervention and political pressures and what we've done to Iran, during that period. And so, again, I'm not somebody who advocates that the CIA go around the world and try to overthrow governments and destabilize governments. I think there's always blowback involved with that. But if you wanted to destroy the Islamic Republic, it seemed like there was a really beautiful opportunity in front of us, especially since there wasn't a clear secession plan in Iran. I mean, they said there were some behind the scenes, but it's not like it was accepted. Like in Saudi Arabia right now, it's accepted that when the king dies, MBS is going to be the next leader. That wasn't the situation in Iran before. And it's baffling that we didn't exploit that. It's also baffling, and this is something Pete Hegseth said that's actually correct in the past few weeks, that when the Trump administration took over just a year ago now, the American stockpiles were depleted. And that got worse, particularly among our stockpile of interceptors during the 12-day war in June. And so we went into this conflict with our stockpile of Patriot, THAAD, and other interceptors at maybe best 50% of what the Pentagon hoped for. I mean, we are getting reports last summer that the U.S. only had 25% of the Patriot interceptors it needed for its defense plans. And so clearly we're strained on a very key piece of what it's going to take to win this conflict. If you really, really, really thought the U.S. had to go to war with Iran, in just a week ago, right, Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, told the American people, told Congress that Iran was not rebuilding its nuclear program yet. So I think you could reasonably assume that if the U.S. did everything it could to delay when Iran started to rebuild its nuclear program, we could probably engage in talks with the Iranians for 6 months, and we tell them that, hey, we're willing to talk with you and try to work out a deal as long as you don't start rebuilding your nuclear program. We already got a 6-month delay. And then, of course, even once they start rebuilding it, it's going to take quite a bit of time before it's functioning. And so it's reasonable to think that the U.S. would have had at least a year or two to fill our stockpiles, to prepare our military. I think it was the Ford that was in Latin America and the Caribbean before going over to the Middle East, and is now, after a laundry fire in a Greek port, and is going to need repairs for 12 to 14 months. And so again, if we want to go to war with Iran, something that's going to be heavy on our Navy, require a lot of aircraft carrier use over the next 2 years, let's get a good number of these ships in dry dock. Let's do all the overhauls, all the maintenance. So when this war starts, not only do we have, 2 aircraft carriers in the region ready to go, but we also have 2, 3, 4 more that could be deployed at any time to replace them. And that's not the situation that we have today. I think that George H.W. Bush is maybe the only other aircraft carrier that could get to the Middle East relatively quickly. There's some reports that the White House is either deploying or thinking of deploying it, but we certainly don't have like that long list that we need. With our fighter jets, before the conflict, they would say that a lot of the F-35 and other F-22s, F-18s in particular, the readiness rate for those aircraft hovers between like 50 and 80%. So again, let's not export so many spare parts to the Israelis and the British and the Turks and the Germans over the next 2 years, and really make sure that our F-35 program, our fighter jets, again, we're going to be relying on them very heavy. We have not only a large number of them, but we got all of the spare parts that we need and everything else to ensure that we could operate at max capacity for the longest period of time. None of that was done. I've interviewed Larry Johnson a few times on my show since this war has started, former CIA analyst. And I keep asking Larry, what is the plan? What was the plan? What do they want to do? And he keeps telling me there is no plan. There was no plan. They have no idea. And so, you brought up the AI chatbot being reset every day. To some degree, it seems like that's going on in the White House, too, with what they have planned for this conflict, where, they wake up in the morning, they look at what they have and they say, okay, this is what we're going to do today. There is no long-term plan, right? They said, oh, we destroyed the Iranian Navy. We destroyed the Iranian Air Force. Iran barely had an Air Force and barely had a Navy, right? They had speedboats and U.S. F-4 Tomcats that they bought from us in the 70s. So destroying Iran's Air Force or Navy are not even meaningful goals for the United States of America. They didn't have long-range bombers that could come over here. They didn't have a Navy that could cross the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean. And so it means absolutely nothing. They have this, with the Iraq war, they will often say that we didn't have clear objectives. We didn't have a clear strategy. With this war, it's not just that it's not clear. There just is none.
One thing that I think has been perhaps overstated is because I think that everything that you are bringing up is correct. And one of the most interesting bits of information I've been tracking is there's an app, and let me pull up, see if I can find the name of it. Yeah. There's an app called, I think it's Zofar, Tzofar. But basically what it is it's the Israeli government's way to let their citizens know they need to get to a bomb shelter, right? And it's sort of an interesting bit of information because you can look at that and say, okay, well, clearly, if we had, as is often claimed, no problem with interceptors, we had as many as we wanted. The Iranians had an ever degrading capacity to hit Israel. You'd assume that those government alerts would be reducing in frequency. Right? If the propaganda matched up with reality, you would see results. But you're not seeing that. The bombardments are continuing, right? We've seen bombardments get very, very close to the kind of old part of Jerusalem, right? The part that's sacred, obviously the, Temple Mount. We've seen, no direct hits, but there's been damage there. So to me, between the two of those, that indicates that, all right, like clearly this isn't going as well as Fox News will have you believe. But I think that there is a desire to read into certain things too much. So for instance, right, an F-35 got hit, made it back. That story kind of died, but there was a desire to sort of make a mountain out of that molehill, right? Yeah, sure, we haven't had any fighter jets hit at all, but one fighter jet taking a missile and making it back to base it's not the end of the world, right? It doesn't mean that we're going to get absolutely smashed tomorrow. But that said, and I'm glad you brought up the aircraft carriers because we've seen these people lying so consistently that when you're starting to hear weird stories about aircraft carriers and it's like, oh, it caught on fire for no reason. Oh, wait, no, it was an electrical issue. It was a dryer. Like the amount of stories I've heard on that have been numerous. And you start to think, even if you're not particularly conspiratorial, was that what really happened? Because we've heard from military hospitals, from inside sources, mine as well as many other people's, that the number of casualties, both killed and wounded, is being deliberately hidden. Right? We've heard, from sources inside the Pentagon that they are delaying notifying family members. They're delaying issuing, medals. They're issuing commendations for people hurt. And again, taken as a whole, one, the conclusion is obviously you can't believe anything these people are saying. And two, if this were going great, why are you hiding so much, right? Why are you being so evasive if this is the soaring success? And so, again, don't get me wrong. I think that, Iranian claims that over 1,000 Americans have been killed are probably a bit overstated, to put it mildly. I don't think it's anywhere near that. Just because we're in an unjust war with the Iranians does not mean the Iranians are speaking truthfully, right? But nonetheless, my general thought has been, if this were going well, people would be acting differently. We would see different things on Israeli, air raid announcements. We'd see different things coming from the Pentagon. And I realize it's sort of a gross measuring stick. It's not like I have, an official document, but just knowing a little bit about human nature, how people react to incentives, I feel like it's a very reasonable assumption to say the war with Iran is turning into a debacle. And I didn't even have to get into my opinion on the Holocaust to arrive at that decision.
Yeah, that's kind of a great way to put an end on that remark there, is that that had nothing to do with it. I really do. So I will never overestimate, I guess, the military industrial complex's ability. I think that they struggle to produce functioning weapon systems of all kind. And so if, the Ford was out at sea a little too long and too much lint built up and it started a laundry fire, I think it's entirely possible, just because I don't think very much of the people who made those ships. I think the most likely explanation is that it was an intentional fire set by an American service member as a way to sabotage the ship, because it was on its way from the Eastern Mediterranean, where it was effectively just defending Israel, over to the Middle East, where it was going to be involved in operations, potentially even an operation to try to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Maybe somebody found out, and because before on that ship, there were reports of, the sewage, the septic system was failing, and they said that they were finding T-shirts in the toilet system, where, I'm sure it happens. You got a little kid at home and they flush their T-shirt or something. Believe it. Soldiers flushing their T-shirt? I don't think so. So I think sabotage is the most likely, although we also shouldn't rule out that maybe an Iranian drone snuck through, or I think it was in the Red Sea or around the Suez at the time. So could have even been like Ansar Allah or somebody got a sneaky drone strike in and it caused a fire or something like that. With the F-35 gain hit, one thing I want to mention is it's kind of presented as, well, the U.S. has been bombing Iran for 4 weeks, which means the U.S. has been flying over Iranian skies for 4 weeks, and Hegseth has really tried to sell this. But I'm not so sure that's the case. I know the fighter jets are dropping bombs, but they're dropping the bombs from Iraqi and Kuwaiti airspace. And we know that because some American fighter jets have been shot down over Kuwait by a supposed friendly fire, which if it was 1, I believe it. If it was 2, I'd be highly skeptical. It's 3, maybe the Kuwaitis intentionally shot down that American fighter jet. That seems maybe more likely to me.
Or maybe, Kyle, maybe the Iranians did it.
Yeah,
the people we're at war with. Like, again, I'm not saying one theory has, more weight over the other, but to your point, 3 friendly fire airplane incidents in a couple days, you're like, all right, man, like, I just don't believe you, right?
Yeah.
Not you, of course, Kyle.
No, I know what you mean. The only reason I'm skeptical of Iran is because the pilots were, ejected over Kuwaiti airspace, all 3 of them. If Iran has like that capable of air defenses, that, because I imagine, they're fairly inland. They're not positioning their missile defenses on the plains. They're probably hidden and tucked away in the mountains or closer to Tehran and things like that, which that's pretty far from Kuwait. That's the only reason I suspect it was somebody in Kuwait who shot those down. But let's say that, that F-35 that was hit or nearly hit, if that was the furthest inland that an American fighter jet had gone, or, only a few fighter jets had verged that far, over Iranian airspace, and they're still getting shot at once they actually get into, the more mountainous areas of Iran, closer to Tehran. That certainly would suggest that the American control over Iranian airspace isn't all that secure. I mean, we could lob as many Tomahawks and other, standoff cruise and ballistic missiles, and certainly the extended range JDAM missiles could hit from quite some distance away if fired from enough altitude over Iraq or Kuwait or something like that into Iran. But eventually you do run out of those munitions, particularly the Tomahawks. And so at that point, you need to start moving more and more inland to be able to hit the same targets or the same depth away from, where the aircraft carrier is stationed.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, I think generally, if we can sort of, bring this to some sort of conclusion, as you've said earlier, right, this war is unpopular. And it's unpopular very early. And you don't have to be a politics nerd. You don't have to be, in the weeds on these issues to notice. And, I know I see this in my peer group, people who, the kind of guys you sports bet and drink beers with, normal guys who have, jobs and wife and kids who aren't super political. And they are saying things that wouldn't be out of place in like 2014 poll, right? That is what has sort of, entered a certain part of particularly young male discourse. And is it the most serious? Is it the most reasoned? No. But those people 30 years ago would have been your normal Republican voters, right? The kind of guys who listened to Rush Limbaugh, maybe, and, George Strait. And those people are gone, completely and totally lost, at least, looking at the war party. And so this incredible just conflagration where all of this political and social capital was burnt up, apparently to secure the Greater Israel Project, that will have consequences. We've already seen the global consequences with our erstwhile allies. And so when I'm saying this is a bad idea, it is primarily motivated because I live here. I care about how this country ends up. It's not because the Iranians are, sliding me $7,000 a post under the table, although, would make a difference. But in all seriousness, right, like there are very real consequences to these actions. Thankfully, it seems, who knows, again, we've expressed anything, it's that you can't really trust these people. The level of Americans directly killed has been relatively low in the grand scheme of things. But unless something changes, and it seems as if, we didn't even mention this, but all signs are pointing towards boots on the ground, this is only going to get worse.
Yep.
This is an ill-conceived goal, poorly pursued. And unfortunately, we will be bearing the consequences for it. But Kyle, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed it. If people are interested in you and your work, well, where can they find you?
Yeah, I host the Kyle Anzalone show. That's my program. As I think I mentioned today, I've interviewed people like Larry Johnson and Daryl Cooper. You talked about Scott Horton. He's coming back to the show next week. So that's what you'll get if you check out the Kyle Anzalone show. I'm an editor at antiwar.com, the Libertarian Institute, and judgenap.com. And then follow me on at Kyle Anzalone _.
Well, this is actually really good because I haven't spoken to Larry in 6 or 9 months. I need to reach out to him. So this is helpful for me. Yeah, all of those will be linked down in the description. Everyone should check those out. As far as my stuff, The Jay Burden Show, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. This is what I do. If you want to support me, a few bucks a month, Patreon, Substack, or Gumroad gets you access to the episodes early and ad-free. In the comments, I'm actually curious, as I've said on a previous episode, I've changed up some stuff on the back end. So the ads should be both less, I guess, kind of in your face. They should be more subtle. And also we're running fewer of them. So let me know if that's what you're seeing on the audio version. Just curious. I can't get rid of them because I need to pay my mortgage, but hopefully it'll at least be less irritating for you guys. Also check out our sponsor, Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching. JD, good guy, small businessman, makes a good product. If you want to learn how to get jacked, you can ask him. I mean, you actually have to do the work, right? Just asking him won't help, but it's better than nothing, I guess. And that's why he pays me to say that his business is better than nothing. Anyway, in all seriousness, Kyle, this has been a ton of fun. And everyone at home, keep your head up. Life can't last forever. Good night.